What's going on, Clarence? Cornmeal. Let's do it. D-man alright. Whoa. D-man alright. Spicy mafia. Spicy mafia. You gotta keep it spicy. If you see a queen, you better wife it. While we litter than a lighter, it makes things much brighter.
All right, so we have on once again the thought leader, the man that we turn to for, well, we call him Vinstradamus around here. He tends to predict things, and at first you think he's nuts, you think he's a little crazy, a little out there, and then just wait a few minutes, or in some cases a few weeks or months, and it comes back. We have the great Vin Armani of CoinText, Countermarkets fame. And, well, before we get into all of that, thanks so much again, Vin, for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me, dude. It's always fun. I love CoinSpice, so it's always fun, man.
Yeah, we love having you. I've noticed a bit of a sea change in you, at least publicly, right? So I'm sure it's not that big of a sea change necessarily, but I noticed you're dealing more with you're becoming more of a debater, more of an advocate in the BCH sense. I see you out there more. Tell us a little bit about the your relationship, your budding relationship with Hotep Jesus, and kind of how that came about.
Yeah, well, he's been hosting these debates. I think he's going to stop now, he said, but it's called Bitcoin Bloodsport. And it turned out that one morning, he had done one with Justin Bonds representing BCH versus Giacomo Zucco representing BTC. And he was going to do one, and it was on a Friday. And in the morning, I guess that the guy that was going to be on, people had said, oh, no, don't have him on. He's not a good representative of BCH. And so Justin hit me in the morning on a Friday and said, hey, would you do this thing? And so I did. And after that, he and I just started kind of like a back and forth in private messages and whatnot. And we got along. And I saw that he had sort of changed his own outlook and his own approach on, and I said, oh, that's very interesting, because I think it's rare when you meet somebody who's kind of like a quote unquote influencer who changes, and who's comfortable with changing, and who is not insecure about maybe having been wrong, and who will admit to being wrong. And I was like, God, this is very interesting.
That's a great point about him.
And so it was notable to me. And I started paying more attention. I started following him, paying attention to sort of what he was doing online, paying attention to his content, and just so much resonated with me. He's like a avowed sort of anarchist, voluntarist. He even goes so far as to say, voting is violence and all of these things. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. I had heard him on Rogan, but he didn't get into all of that stuff, So I said, okay, this is kind of a multifaceted person. And I reached out to him and said, hey, would you be willing to just have a conversation with me about this whole thing, like your whole journey? This is interesting. And I think we had a really good conversation, but through that, we've developed a little bit of a relationship. I wouldn't say too much, but I really do think that he's an interesting person, and he has brought recently a really interesting take on crypto. And so I don't know how involved he is or is not going to be, but I definitely think he's somebody to follow. He's super sharp, and like I say, sort of has a rare quality about him when it comes to being an influencer. So yeah, I think he's a cool dude. I think he brings a lot to the table. So
yeah, I noticed right away, because he's admittedly he'll say that he's kind of new to these ideas, and he'll stop these guys who are just, well, and I count myself there, just so in their own space that they use kind of masturbatory vocabulary. They sort of assume everybody knows what they're talking about, and he'll stop them. He'll just be like, hey, wait, what? And go back, and why do you think that way, and so on. That's super valuable, and it leads to, I don't know, it just tells me how strong he is in terms of a personality, where he's no shame. Like, if he doesn't know, he's gonna ask, and that's missing for sure in crypto.
Agreed. We have Daniel Krawitz has said we have a know-it-all problem. And I think that I myself I actively try to prevent myself from falling into that. And I'm going to start doing, I think I'm going to do a video pretty soon, because I do think that there's a lot of value in people who do have some technical chops sort of toning back, and I don't want to say dumbing down, but certainly like giving context in their arguments. I know that there's a lot of arguments for one thing or another, but there's a real lack of context. And so I don't feel like the full weight of the community is really able to participate all the time, but we would be much better off if people were, because a lot of times when you strip away the jargon and the certain terms, things are very easy for people to understand in Bitcoin, but you really have to take the time to explain it. And I value the people, and I have valued on this journey the people who have been able to simplify things. So like I really try to do that when given the opportunity. I'm not always successful at it, right? But I do try to simplify things. And again, it's not dumbing it down. The concepts are like the concepts in Bitcoin around the incentives, the economics, even a lot of the math, like things like proof of work, are actually relatively easy for people to understand if they're simplified down to their like core elements. And I think if more people understand, then the community is much more engaged, and I think then that makes the currency that much more valuable. So I do think that it's something that people who consider themselves thought leaders, especially on the technical side, could really serve to do a lot better.
And I think this year has been a particularly fateful year in that regard. We're seeing the culture change. You talked about it more recently in your video on tradition and some of the Satoshi, one Satoshi provide fees and so on. There is I think right now with the market, and it's dangerous to kind of talk about it, because as soon as inevitably when I talk about the market going down, it goes up, and vice versa. You can pretty much set your clock that if I predict something's going to happen, just do the opposite. So I think what we're heading into is a sea change where a lot of us have kind of grown up in the space. And I saw this more recently, and I know you read it as well, with Jan Fuchball's look back at some of his assumptions and how change is maybe kind of a bad word to use, but or an incorrect word to use, but more like he called it a crystallizing, like it's becoming clearer to him as to what he's doing and why he's doing it. And culture is very important. And I think Hotep is tapping into that in the sense that sort of the obvious when you watch him is that he's a Black American dude, right? So this is a very white space with very white American assumptions. And we at CoinSpice have really kind of stepped away from that. We find the social dynamics off-putting at times and almost beside the point. But then Hotep is able to get in there as that guy, never touch those issues, although you guys did a little bit recently. Sure. But in terms of the Bitcoin debate, he just kind of stays there. But it's very obvious how he comes at the world is from I hope I'm not patronizing him, because I wouldn't want him to think that he's not, Pan-African and all the things he wants to be. But there's a very Americanness side to how he sees the world.
I don't think he would deny that, though.
Okay.
I think that's, he says that, that he's coming from an American milieu. Certainly when he calls himself a conservative, I mean, he's saying it as a conservative American. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's definitely not saying it as a conservative African. That's a whole other thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's a whole other ball of wax right there. So yeah, look, we're in our own, we're always subject to our own milieu. I think this is one of the difficult things, or one of the challenges that we have with Bitcoin, is while it does seem to, I mean, my own personal belief was that Satoshi Nakamoto is an American, right? Like, because as I've written about, I believe that Satoshi was Hal Finney. So it's coming from sort of a very American cultural ideal. But if this thing when this thing spreads to a much greater level, I mean, people are going to approach it from whatever their own cultural milieu is. And I think that to assume that the best way to approach this thing is the way that we've been approaching it culturally is, I think it's arrogant, and I think it's also probably pretty naive, because every culture has their own history, their own economic history, their own understanding of what money is. And I think that we would be stupid to not at least audit some of those assumptions and beliefs to see if maybe we could pull some value out of them.
And for people in the United States like myself and maybe you as well, though you've dealt more in cash businesses throughout your career,
sure,
we have good money, quote unquote, right? We have money that works. We rarely have to worry about volatility and so on, taking into account, of course, all the Austrian inflation problems and so on with the Fed. But for the most part, it works fine. Now, if you're African American in certain parts of the country, Latino, et cetera, your relationship to the banking industry, your relationship to cash, your relationship to access to the financial system is very different than, say, mine.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of Bitcoiners have kind of given up on the United States and quote unquote developed countries or first world countries because things are so good here. So we're kind of looking east, which makes a lot of sense, or third world in some cases. But I think we're missing kind of because Hotep, as soon as he dipped his foot, he immediately became like super curious about it, and he brought with him all of his assumptions. And it was fantastic to watch him interact with guys who are, kind of living off the fat of the land. They, this is maybe a hobby to them. This is maybe, something they do in their spare time when they're doing other things. Whereas for Hotep, this seemed to be, something where he could see massive change happening. Am I right there, or have I kind of overshot myself?
No, I think that we do tend to ignore the solutions for the people who are right next door. And so like in Countermarkets, I've actually written quite a few articles about having been in an all cash business. It sort of sticks out to me when I've encountered them in my life more than anything, because there's a set of trade-offs, but it creates a set of challenges that you would look to people who have been in all cash businesses to say, well, how did they overcome that? And I know that when I got into an all cash business, I actually reached back to somebody that I had worked with in tech startups, who is a Korean American from LA. I'm from Southern California, and his family ran Korean grocery stores. So they had a slew of Korean grocery stores, mostly in lower income areas, which were all cash. And I remember speaking with him about that and actually spending time. We became friends when we were working together. And so I reached back to him to ask him a lot of advice about, well, what's the best way to like store this money? And what's, like all of these various things. And so here was this culture, this all cash Korean grocer culture. And so when I look at, for me, I'm like, wow, it seems to me that we are ignoring outreach to places that are close to us because there's a cultural divide. And because this just seems like this is not, it's actually not even on our radar. Another instance, with CoinText, we did this remittance program where we started this little pilot program, and it was actually put together by, he used to be known as Captain Cook. I think he's known as at Kush online on Twitter now. But he's an Iranian German, so he's of Iranian background, German, who had this Ghanaian friend who had connections in Ghana, and so they were going from Germany to Ghana with this remittance using CoinText and AnyPay. But in speaking with him, he was really interested in remittance. And, he brought up this idea of Hawala, which is like this Islamic money movement network which is like billions and billions move through these informal networks throughout the world. But for somebody who doesn't come from that background, we wouldn't even think that that's there.
Right.
And it, and so for me, and speaking with him, it was like, oh, wow, here's this network that is a perfect plugin. This Hawala network is like perfect plugin for Bitcoin, but yet they haven't been introduced to Bitcoin. And so this is the reason why I say that, like, I'm always interested when motivated, intelligent people bring their own cultural dynamics into the mix, because guaranteed they've come up with, this is the quote that I ran across was, tradition is a set of solutions for problems that we have forgotten we had. And everybody has an economic tradition. A culture can't survive into the year 2019 without an economic tradition, without a money transfer tradition, without a saving tradition, all of these things. And so I would like to be able to pull from all of those, because Bitcoin can support them all.
Yeah, and Islam is a fascinating nut to crack for Bitcoin and CoinSpice. We spend far too little time talking about it, but just the ideas of usury alone are fascinating.
Exactly.
And how they deal with these things. And yeah, anyway, I love the fact of seeing you on there, and it just never occurred to me that you would be part of the Hotep debate series. So when I saw you on that, this is going to be interesting. And there's no better contrast than you and Paul Starr.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're night and day. But you know what? We actually get along pretty well. We get at each other intellectually, but I think we both appreciate each other as people. So it was actually nice.
Yeah, dude's a super brain. That's a fantastic discussion. I was really impressed. I've been familiar with your work for a while, and your polemical style. And how you speak rhetorically, and I thought, this is going to be interesting, because I couldn't imagine how you guys were gonna, some of it I anticipated, like, the meta debate about the definition about the definition about the debate.
Course.
I definitely, that's just Paul through and through. But I thought it was a fascinating, great discussion, and I don't think it ever would have happened without Hotep.
Agreed, 100%.
He comes in. The way I see him is kind of the Toto to our Dorothy. Like he's sort of taking us through this journey. Anyway, I could talk about that guy for a long time. But the most important subject that we're here to talk about is Kanye and Jesus King. I'm just playing with you. Anyway, culturally, I've seen, staying on this theme for just a couple more seconds here on them, then we'll get on to the meat of the matter. You're talking more about having been a father, and I've noticed you. I don't know if you're nostalgic necessarily, but you're always very contemplative. I've just noticed a change. Am I right that you're kind of putting that out there more about sort of almost in the Misesian way, right? Looking, your time preference is a little bit longer than maybe it was in the past.
Oh, no doubt. So I have a 4-year-old and now a 9-month-old. So I think certainly the second one coming along, that's the one. The first was very, it's very stressful, and you're just like, how can I keep this little child alive? You know what I mean? But this, seeing her grow. I have 2 daughters, so seeing the first one sort of start to talk and interact, and her personality, and then the second one coming, certainly I've had time to contemplate, and then in that space of time has been really, I've immersed myself into Bitcoin as well, and with CoinText, and then growing and doing these other protocols, and contracting out and doing more work in the ecosystem, and contributing to more projects. And I love it. Yes, it's given me a lot of time to contemplate. It's also me back into software development now for extended years, after having this interesting hiatus that was definitely that was fun and unique and got a chance to be on TV and have this level of celebrity and live this very sort of fantastical life, you know, the type of thing that people would that would be like anyone's fantasy life.
Mm-hmm.
And then to come full circle and sort of realize, oh wow, you know, I'm actually the most satisfied when I can write software and sort of I'm kind of like a homebody, and then to never thought that I would enjoy being a father and all of this, and realizing it's just really puts a lot of things into perspective. And I don't know that it's not nostalgia, but I think I'm starting to appreciate things that I had thought were, let's say, passé, or maybe a waste of time,
Mm-hmm.
or it's hard to say, but those things that have stuck around, I'm starting to appreciate why. And it's interesting, you know, it's funny that you bring up the Kanye thing, because
Mm-hmm.
as of late, that was like a trigger. It resonated with me. His mother and my mother were actually friends. And so although Kanye and I have never met, they were both very involved with like the National Teacher Association. And so they knew each other when we were kids. And so she would come back from being in Champaign-Urbana at like the yearly or semi-yearly meetings and would say, oh yeah, my friend Donda, you know, her son. And then I remember her coming back one time and was like, Donda, her son that I always tell you about, have you ever heard of Kanye West? he just got signed to a record label. And I was like, I was DJing at the time, and I was like, I don't know who the hell this guy is, right? So it was very interesting that like I've been following his career because we're the same age, you know, our mothers were friends. We had a very sort of similar upbringing in that way. They had very similar personalities. And so it's interesting that like, you know, I saw at sort of the point that he's at in his life and the things that he's realizing resonated a lot with me. And it was just it's very coincidental and gave me an opportunity to really think, you know? And so it's different. And I think that this thing that we're involved in, I've always viewed it, even before this, I've said that I believe this is a multi-generational project. And, you know, these little gains about like little things about like what's happening today or tomorrow with the price and whatnot. Mm-hmm. That's so uninteresting to me, because I know that if we do this thing right, like where we're at today as compared to where we will all be 20 years from now is just like light years, to where we'll look back and think that we were so silly about like, oh, it went up or down 20% in a month or whatever. And for me, yeah, definitely. I mean, having kids has made that change for me. But yet at the same time, I think it's very important for people to go through the whole experience, right? And then just for those of us who have sort of gone through and come out on the other side, to support people and mentor people as they move through their own experience in it. Not saying, oh, you have to have the same time preference as me, but to be there when they come out on the other side.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And when I saw you post about Kanye, I was kind of cracking up, because I get a lot of crap for liking him, and I sort of like him.
Oh, he's a genius, dude. Yeah. I mean, he's an absolute musical genius.
Right. And when you say that to people who have only kind of seen him, I mean, he's certifiably nuts, right? I mean, even he'll say that. He'll call
Most geniuses are, though. If
Yeah.
you're a real genius, yeah.
Yeah, he'll say, you know, I've got mental health issues and so on. But he legit. So even if, how do I approach this? Because I'm going to connect it to Bitcoin, I swear. So he obviously has spoken about Bitcoin, stream of consciousness, a couple times with Charlemagne the God when they did their interview and so on a few years back. But when you even if you don't like his music, and I don't know how you couldn't like Gold Digger, Blood on the Trees, Black Skinhead, I don't know how you can't like that stuff, but let's say you don't. Just look at the effort of having him at the Video Music Awards a few years back, shadow in front of a canvas where you don't even see him, and he's just back there kind of dancing and rapping and talking about, you know, this long lost love and how, I mean, it was unbelievable. And the Stacey Dash stuff he did, that video with her dropping her off at the airport.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, watch that video and tell me Eminem could have 6,000 years and never touch that.
Agreed.
So, but anyway, so he is. We've I've tried to anyway connect people to the to the Kardashians, and it seems like there's 6 degrees of separation between sort of everything and them, and I've kind of come into a new respect for them. But this idea of the outliers, the people that everybody thinks are crazy, has a lot to do with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's becoming a meme. Stephen Colbert recently, said he, what he'd rather be relegated to in terms of being tortured and so on, or having someone talk to them about Bitcoin and blockchain. As sort of his final example. So sort of the outsiders that kind of seem weird and whatever. I like the fact that we're thought of that way, but also that we're now bringing in people who, like the Hoteps of the world, who are challenging us and who are taking us back to kind of the basics of like, we're constantly having to go back and, okay, why are we doing this again?
Yes. That is a huge point. And I mean, this is my whole little thing. And I posted it again recently because I like to post it whenever the price is dropping. But I have this tweet that I'm constantly retweeting that says, if you want the price to go back up, get back to asking what is Bitcoin, and if you want the price to keep going down, keep acting or keep acting like you know the answer. And that's really what it comes down to, is you have to go back in and be introspective. And this is on a personal level too, is that you should be in the things that you're doing in your life. Don't allow mission creep. You have to step back and say, wait, why am I here? Why am I here? What am I doing? What is the purpose of this? And that's why it's good to have principles. That's why it's good to think about, if you're just here for the money, like if you're just here for a number go up, that's not really a good reason and a sustainable reason to be here, as we see when the number goes down. And as we're seeing right now, you can't be like Coach Wooden used to tell his players, I shouldn't be able to tell whether you won or lost by your faces after a game. And that's what a real player is like. Because you're going to win and you're going to lose. If you put in your best effort, then you shouldn't have any change. You shouldn't be so happy that you won because there's another game ahead of you, another day. But you shouldn't be so sad that you lost, and dejected for the same reason. And when it's this manic swing is one reason why I actually really enjoy the BCH community. I really enjoy the Bitcoin Cash community, because it's like just build. There's not a lot of paying attention to price. And to their credit, BSV has a very sort of similar attitude. They pulled out of the. I think with that fork, we got that, and I think that people should have, if they have a longer time horizon, and they know what they're here for, and they constantly go back and look and see what are my principles and what is my reason for being involved in this space, it can really bring some meaning to your life, like in a real way, not just as a hobby. And then people won't be like Colbert and saying that they don't like to be around people talking to them about Bitcoin. People come to me to get me to tell them more about Bitcoin because I'm passionate about it. And not because the number go up, not because they're going to get rich, but because it's so damn interesting on every level. And if I can communicate to them how interesting and innovative and new and powerful and how much sovereignty it's going to give them, not in an ideological way, but on their level, then dude, like that's how we spread the message, and that's how Bitcoin's going to grow.